14 minutes, that's all it took for the steep grey spine of Vimy Ridge to turn from fortress to graveyard. 1,012 Canadians killed, 7,000 wounded, and a nation's name carved in stone. At dawn on Easter Monday, 1917, 4 divisions of raw colonial troops did what 2 mighty empires could not. They stormed an impregnable German stronghold in sleet, mud, and a blizzard of steel. Many were boys who had never left their farms, prairie wheat cutters, mill hands, Nova Scotia fishermen. By noon, they held the heights, and the world learned to spell the word Canada in gunsmoke and courage. To see how they did it, how meticulous planning, lethal innovation, and raw nerve toppled a citadel, we must travel back to 1914. A world on fire, and a dominion still searching for its soul. In June 1914, 1 pistol shot in Sarajevo toppled an old world order like a row of porcelain dominoes. Austria-Hungary lunged at Serbia. Russia flexed to answer. Germany marched west through Belgium. Britain declared war. And within days, steam whistles in Canada shrieked across wheat-gold prairies and pindark coasts, summoning volunteers to a fight 4,000 miles from home. They came in droves: farmhands who could harness a plough at 16, bookkeepers who had never fired a rifle, Micmac guides who could track a deer in snowfall, Chinese immigrants desperate to prove belonging. The Canadian Expeditionary Force, the CEF, was born inside canvas tents at Valcartier, Quebec. Within 6 weeks, 33,000 men drilled under chilly September stars, practicing bayonet lunges against straw sacks while mosquitoes feasted on their ankles. Of the 33,000 who sailed that October, fewer than half would ever see home unscathed. April 22, 1915. Ypres salient. A green-yellow fog slithered from German trenches. 168 tons of chlorine. French colonial troops broke. Lungs turned acid. Eyes burned blind. The gap in the Allied line yawned half a mile wide, and there, under a dying sun, the untested 1st Canadian Division stood alone. Captain Edward Niven ordered his platoon to urinate on handkerchiefs and clamp them over mouths as makeshift gas masks. With rifles held like quarterstaves, Canadians charged into the haze, buying 6 critical hours until British reinforcements plugged the breach. 4 days later, the 48th Highlanders counterattacked at St. Julian. Bodies lay so thick, the men used them as sandbags. Canada lost 6,035 killed and wounded, its baptism of fire and gas. 1916, on the Somme River the British launched a great push. July 1st saw 57,000 British casualties in a single morning. Canadians entered the ordeal in September. Ordered to seize Corselet, they advanced under the new rolling barrage concept, shells lifting yard by yard, infantry hugging the explosions. They took the village, but for every yard gained, 2 bodies fell. A diary entry by Nurse Grace McIntosh, Casualty Clearing Station 6, reads, "Shell shock, they call it. Men sit, mute, rocking, eyes tracking bombs that no longer fall." Across 4 months, the CEF lost 24,000 at the Somme, enough to fill every seat in Toronto's baseball stadium twice. The slaughter sharpened Canadian commanders. If men must die, every death must purchase real ground. Julian Byng, an unassuming British cavalryman with a taste for marmalade, took command of Canadian forces late 1915. Beside him rose Arthur Currie, beefy and owlish behind wire-rimmed spectacles, once a Victoria insurance agent, now a master of artillery mathematics. They reorganized 4 divisions into a single Canadian corps, 100,000 strong. Currie, fretting over every casualty, insisted on science, accurate maps, rehearsed attacks, not waves, but teams. he promoted on merit. Sergeants became majors, majors colonels. If they could think on their feet, national barriers blurred. Anglophone, Francophone, indigenous, black battalions, united by necessity and stubborn pride. Curry's genius weapon, information. Aerial photographs layered over transparent grids. Trench models sculpted in chalk so every private could memorize terrain he had never seen. Vimy Ridge had devoured 150,000 French lives in 1915. British tunnelers later blew 600 tons of ammonal under enemy lines, but failed to exploit the gains. German artillery observers atop Vimy could direct fire onto Allied supply lines as far as Arras. By March 1917, the Allies planned a wider Arras offensive. Vimy had to go. British High Command, skeptical, handed the task to Canadians. Being accepted with a simple nod, Curry drew a chalk line on the mess hall floor, tapped it with his boot, and said, "Gentlemen, this is our ridge. We shall not give it back." Canadian engineers extended German tunnels and built new subways. Grange Subway, 1.1 kilometers long, wired for electricity. Narrow-gauge rails, hauling shells. Goodwin Tunnel, fitted with underground water pumps and first-aid posts. They sank 11 mines packed with ammonal to destroy machine gun nests seconds before the assault. Artillerymen, led by Lieutenant Colonel Andrew McNaughton, employed sound ranging and flash spotting, microphones and telescopes, triangulating enemy gun positions to the meter. By 0 hour, 83% of German batteries were neutralized. Each company practiced their full-scale attack plans. Officers carried colored linen maps. Corporals bore sawed-off telephone poles, capped with flags to mark objectives. When the whistle blew, every man would know the ridge by heart, though he had never walked it. April 8th. Sleet turns trenches into slush. Rations arrive late. Some units gnaw frozen bully beef. Chaplain Frederick Scott records giving Last Communion at 2 o'clock by candle stub. One corporal breaks a tooth on a tin of jam. Jokes that Jerry will pay the dentist bill. At 4 o'clock, runners move through tunnels whispering gas on. All troops fix masks as insurance. Spirits buoy when word spreads. We have 1 million shells behind us. Easter Monday, 5:30 sharp. Darkness still cloaks the ridge, but the heavens ignite anyway. 983 Allied guns fire in perfect unison, each one pre-registered by mathematics and aerial photograph. For a full minute the night blazes like noon, revealing a no-man's land churned into porridge. The creeping barrage begins its grim ballet, set to an iron metronome. Lift 100 yards every 3 minutes. Infantry emerge behind it like shadows chasing a rolling curtain of flame. Stay on the skirts. Officers have drilled lag, and you meet uncut wire rush, and you meet your own shell bursts. The 14th Battalion of the Royal Montreal Regiment scrambles up the frozen slope. German sentries, dazed by shell concussion, offer ragged bursts before being overrun. Private Emile Coty recalls a Stokes mortar round landing in a dugout. We saw bodies flung out like dolls, then we were inside, bayonets down. By 6:05, the first coloured flare arches skyward. Black line taken. Horses Hall, 18-pounder field pieces forward. Emplacing fresh batteries, atop ground seized only minutes before. The Pimple juts northwest, steep as a church roof, and riddled with concrete bunkers. German MG-08s here possess enfilading fire over the plain. Wave 1 climbs through knee-deep sleet. Gunfire shreds ranks. Captain Thane McDowell, 38th Battalion, loses half his platoon yet advances alone. Revolver in each fist. A quote by Captain Thane McDowell VC, in a post-war interview. When the second gun jammed, I told the sergeant to gather any Hun still breathing and follow. We took the bunker by sheer cheek. McDowell captures 2 pillboxes and 77 prisoners. He will earn the Victoria Cross. Still, the crest holds out. The pimple will not fall until dawn on the 10th. Major Alan Brooks artillery observers, now on forward slopes, signal corrections by heliograph flashes. A hidden German battery near La Folly Farm opens at 7 o'clock, severing 2 platoons. Lieutenant Harry Cockburn leads a bombing party up a communication trench, tossing Mills grenades every 7 paces. The gun is silenced, but only 4 of the original 16 Canadians return. A diary entry by Lieutenant Cockburn reads, "I watched my sergeant load a new magazine, smile, and disappear. Vapor, nothing left." By 8:15, the Canadians pushed through craters, nicknamed courts, and alleys. Snow turns pink. Chaplains move among the fallen, applying iodine and final rites in equal measure. Forward companies pause, only long enough to scratch quick notes on field postcards. "Alive! Holding the line." At 9 o'clock, German 77mm batteries adjust. Despite preemptive neutralization, 85 guns survive and begin SOS fire on the ridge slopes. Shrapnel cascades like hail. Canadian gunners answer with silencing concentrations every 6 minutes. Brigadier General Victor Odlum, 11th Brigade, refuses to yield momentum. He orders signalers to lay new telephone lines under fire, linking infantry directly to creeping barrage timing HQ, shaving minutes off correction cycles. Historian Tim Cook will later call this the Ethernet of 1917. By 12:30, Canadians control most of the crest. Observers gaze down on the Douai Plain, shocked at open farmland, suddenly visible after years cloaked by German eyes. One corporal sketches the panorama in his notebook. "Seems we've moved from ditch to mountain in a day, yet pockets resist." At Hill 145, the highest point, Grenadier Regiment 123 fights bunker to bunker. Lieutenant Graham Thompson Lyle leads to sections with Lewis guns. Clearing the final trench only at 3 p.m., Lyall will later receive the Victorian Cross. Casualty clearing stations in the Zouave Valley overflow. Doctors pioneered triage tags coded blue, yellow, red. Orderlies pump blood using mason jar gravity rigs. Early battlefield transfusions. German counterattacks probed the new Canadian line at dusk. Stormtrooper detachments launched trench raids under mortar smoke at 23:10 and 1:45. Captain James Tate, 78th Battalion, rallies cooks and signallers, manning a captured MG-08 that mows down 2 waves. By dawn, bodies lie, fused into ice. 4 o'clock, fresh artillery. 6-inch howitzers fire a gas cell mix, chloropocrine, against Bavarian Reserve Regiment 262. At 5:32, companies of the 50th Battalion Calgary and the 44th Manitoba assault uphill with fixed bayonets. Sleet turns to driving snow, masking their advance. Sleet turns to driving snow, masking their advance. Germans, blinded by gas and weather, are overwhelmed in 12 minutes. Germans, blinded by gas and weather, are overwhelmed in 12 minutes. The German commander, Oberstleutnant von Messinbock, surrenders his field dagger rather than watch more men die. It is the first clear Allied victory of 1917. But victory never comes free. Total Canadian casualties for the 9th to the 12th of April, 10,600. German casualties, around 20,000, including 4,200 prisoners. Now let's remember some of the heroes of the time. Private Jacob Fisher, 22nd Battalion Van Jews, wrote in Yiddish to his mother in Montreal, "I can not wash the ridge from my hands. Perhaps God will." He was killed by artillery while helping stretcher bearers on the 11th. his letter returned unopened. Nursing Sister Alice Isaacson, No. 7 Canadian Stationary Hospital, noted performing amputation in a tent lit only by a storm lantern, the blade freezing to her fingers inside blood-soaked gloves. Sergeant Thomas Irving, 10th Battalion, earned the military medal for dragging 2 wounded Germans into Canadian lines, saying, "We are not butchers. Tomorrow they may save one of ours." The German 6th Army, now blind on the Arras front, withdraws artillery to Hindenburg positions. Allied Command studies Canadian set-piece playbook, detailed rehearsal on tape-marked grounds, comprehensive counter-battery neutralization, integrated logistics tunnels, barrage scheduled to the minute. These principles inform the later Battle of Amiens, the opening of the 100 days that ends the war. Telegram offices across Canada clatter day and night. Newspapers print casualty lists alongside triumphant headlines. French and English Canadian divisions, previously at political odds over conscription, shared joint commemoration parades in Quebec City. A quote from editorial, Toronto Globe. The 12th of April 1917. Out of the blood of Vimy is forged a new Canada, equal among nations, its sons, the guardians of democracy. Some footnotes encourage gas discipline. Not a single Canadian battalion broke under German Phosgene shelling on April 11th. Testament to rigorous training post-Ypres. Signal pigeons. 618 pigeons released during the battle. Only 71 reached lofts, yet those 71 delivered critical coordinates. First war graves registration. Currie orders burial parties to map every temporary grave, precursor to Commonwealth War Graves Commission protocols. By dusk, on April 12th, the ridge is silent, save for the whimper of shell-shocked men and the rumble of field kitchens moving up duckboard roads. For Canada, the victory is both beacon and burden, proof of martial prowess, and a ledger of grief too deep to count. In the months to come, politicians will leverage Vimy for greater autonomy. Poets will mine it for a new national myth. The ground sleeps now, but memory does not. To understand what this broken strip of limestone did to a young Dominion, we must examine its cost, and its echoes, on the people who returned, and on those who never did. Victory's trumpet fades quickly on Vimy Ridge, replaced by the rasp of stretcher poles and the drip of thawing sleet from torn sandbags. Of the 97,000 Canadians who attacked, 10,602 are casualties. 3,598 will never speak again, save for the letters stuffed in their pockets. A runner counts bodies against nominal rolls. His pencil snaps at column wounded, abdomen, fottle. He borrows another and keeps tally. The Canadian Medical Corps at Zouave Valley erects 3 walking wounded tents and a red flag surgical marquee. Sister Alice Isaacson records in her diary, "I amputated 2 legs before breakfast. Both lads thanked me for the chloroform as if I'd served tea." Surgeon Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Bruce Robertson pioneers direct transfusion. Tubing from healthy donor to casualty, glass valve in the middle. 40 pints flow in 12 hours. Survival rate doubles. Compared with some figures, Ambulance number 3 deploys a generator-powered X-ray cart, nicknamed the Rent-Gone Wagon. Radiographer Edith Hines plates 120 men on day 1, locating shrapnel before it blackens tissue. It is the first battlefield use of mobile radiography by Canadian units. The psychological shock of shell fire, shell shock, still dismissed by many brass as lack of fiber, manifests in stutters, tremors, and vacant gazes. Dr. Charles Myers visits casualty stations, prescribes rest, music, and talking therapy. Radical then, Private Leonard Cousins, 46th Battalion, is found mute, sketching the same shell burst over and over in his notebook. A nurse places a violin in his hands, After 4 days, he speaks again. First word, home. On the topic of reburial and war graves, within 48 hours burial parties mark every fallen Canadian with a wooded cross and field service card, noting map reference. Curry instructs, no man to be left unrecorded. Namelessness is a second death. These cards become the basis for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. By 1922, every Canadian name missing a known grave is carved onto the future Vimy Memorial. 11,285 in all. Some home front reverberations include: in Halifax, telegraph keys clatter until midnight. One operator types 78 death notices in a single shift. Her hands bleed from contact, but she wraps them in cotton and keeps going. The press reactions by Le Devoir, Montreal Nosfros, Tombun May Le Drapeau Mont, Calgary Herald. Our boys have stormed the cliff. The Empire could not. Editorials advocate conscription. Quebec protests swell. Ottawa launches a third victory bond drive. Vimy headlines sell $139 million in 3 weeks. Funding rail lines that will later carry returning wounded home. The soldiers return and long wounds at the repatriation hospitals. Hospital ships anchor at Pier 21, Halifax. Blind veterans tap canes down gangways. Amputees hobble on wooden tin legs. Crowds cheer, yet families weep at changed faces. Disabled soldiers receive Burgess artificial suits, tailored jackets hiding missing arms. Fashion students at Toronto's Eton School sew them free of charge. The Land Settlement Act passes at Parliament, granting 160-acre plots to veterans. Many prairies farms today rest on Vimy land grants, literal seedbeds of sacrifice. The political shockwaves include Prime Minister Robert Borden touring the front in May 1917. He sees Ridge still pocked with fresh graves. On return he insists Canada sign peace treaties in its own right. Imperial War Cabinet begrudgingly agrees. Domino leading to full diplomatic autonomy at Versailles 1919. Canadian War Records Office commissions painters A.Y. Jackson, Frederick Varley, and Arthur Nash. They sketch under shell-torn trees. Color palettes, mud brown and blood. Their canvases hang today in the Canadian War Museum. Permanent windows into Easter 1917. In 1920, the Ghosts of Vimy film was created. It was a silent feature shot on location. Veterans act as extras. Box office smash. Banned in Germany for inciting resentment. Surviving reels show actors pausing mid-scene to salute real graves. In 1936, the Vimy pilgrimage happened. A steamship chartered by the Canadian Legion carries 6,200 veterans and families to unveil the monument. Seasickness mingles with PTSD. One veteran leaps over rail at night believing flares still falling. He is rescued in later states. The ocean sounded like an artillery barrage. Researchers at the University of Calgary map unexploded ordnance beneath Vimy using ground-penetrating radar. Estimates £3 million still buried. High school travel grants send 2,000 students annually. They plant crimson tulips, shaped as maple leaves, visible from drone footage. April 9 became Vimy Ridge Day. Federal buildings fly flags at half-mast until sunset, echoing the lone artillery piece that still fires a salute at 5:30 local time on the ridge. Brass plaques tell us Vimy was a glorious victory, yet glory never stands alone. It leans on grief, the way a veteran leans on a cane. For every foot of limestone captured, a mother in Winnipeg waited by a silent telephone. A bride in St. John's folded an unworn veil. A child in Moose Jaw traced a name carved too soon in marble. Still, from that grief rose a resolve that Canada would not be just an echo of empire, but a voice clear, bilingual, and fierce in its own right. The ridge, once scarred, now blooms each spring with wild poppies, and in the hush between dawn and morning, you can almost hear the rustle of letters never sent, carried by the same wind that once drove sleet in soldiers' faces. In the days after the guns fell silent, newspapers from Halifax to Victoria printed a single, defiant claim. At Vimy, Canada became a nation. It was more slogan than scholarship. Yet slogans have power. They lace themselves through the arteries of memory until years later they pulse like undeniable truth. For politicians, Vimy was proof Canada deserved a chair at the imperial table. For soldiers, it was vindication that colonial boys could match, and sometimes surpass, the professional armies of Europe. And for bereaved families, it was a promise their sacrifice meant something larger than one silent house on a quiet provincial street. By 1923, Canadian schoolbooks dedicate entire chapters to Vimy. Maps trace creeping barrage lines. Black and white plates show battered but smiling troops on the height. Teachers present the battle as the moment Canadian boys lifted an empire's weight. In Quebec classrooms, lessons are bilingual, emphasizing French-Canadian heroics. The 1960s Quiet Revolution challenges triumphant Anglophone narratives. New curricula highlight Quebec's opposition to conscription and the linguistic tensions inside the trenches, yet even revisionist texts concede the tactical brilliance of Currie's plan, forging an unlikely consensus. Vimy was both a triumph and a tragedy. Vimy in art, literature and film. A.Y. Jackson paints a copse, Vimy Ridge, a charred tree against grey hill. No human figures, yet saturated with presence. Varley's For What depicts a wagon piled with corpses. Viewers look away, then look back, repelled but compelled. The novel Generals Die in Bed by Charles Yale Harrison sets a fictionalized sequence on Vimy Slope. The verse, Indigenous poet E. Capel writes, Song for Ridge, framing Vimy as a treaty of blood uniting nations within Canada. 1950s National Film Board, short, Vimy Ridge, Shield of Democracy shows Boy Scouts hiking the memorial grounds. 2007. Docudrama Pastendel devotes its first act to veterans haunted by Vimy ghosts. Proof the Ridge still sells tickets. Vimy in physical memory. Stone and soil, the monument itself, carved from Croatian limestone. Walter Allwood's twin pylons soar 27 meters. Each figure, grief, faith, peace, looks outward across old front lines. Beneath, a tomb containing soil from every Canadian province. Guides whisper that when fog descends, you can't tell where stone ends and sky begins, a metaphor too perfect to ignore. The preserved trenches are maintained by Parks Canada, a 250-meter segment of frontline trench, duckboards replaced every decade by scouts. QR codes now stand where chalk signposts once did. Scan and AR overlays show troops leaping the parapet. Since 1998, the Vimy Foundation's bursary program has flown 8,000 students to France. They walk tunnels still etched with graffiti. Kilroy was here, B. McClure, Regina, 1917. At sunset, each student reads one carved name aloud. For many, it's the first time history feels heavier than a textbook. Every April 9th, Twitter trends, #VIMY104, #VIMY105, numbers climbing with years. TikTok snippets blend drone footage with whispered poetry. Algorithmic feeds give 60-second glimpses of an 11-hour barrage. The Canadian War Museum launched Vimyvar in 2020. Gamers navigate trench mazes, then remove headsets, blinking, as if resurfacing from 30 feet of chalk. Vimy and Politics of Identity. Robert Borden's insistence on separate representation at Versailles is often traced to Vimy. Flags lowered on April 9th at foreign embassies emphasize Canada's independent diplomacy. A direct line from chalk cliffs to United Nations floor. Critics argue glorifying Vimy masks darker truths. Indigenous veterans denied benefits. Quebec divided by conscription. Chinese laborers buried in unmarked graves behind the lines. Yet others claim confronting those shadows proves Canadian maturity. In 2022, First Nations elders held a smudging ritual at the ridge, smoke wafting through limestone pylons. They read names of Indigenous soldiers aloud in Cree and Ojibwe, layering another language onto the cacophony of memory. In closing, history is a relay. Each generation carries a torch a little further. Its flame fed by memory, by story, by stone stained with weathered names. Vimy Ridge is not merely a hill in France. It is the place Canada found its footing. One boot in mud, one hand on rifle, both eyes lifted to the future. We leave their footprints in chalk, their letters in museum glass, their blood in soil that still grows poppies. Yet the echo of Vimy is not confined to April 1917. It rings whenever courage meets impossible odds. It whispers in classrooms, murmurs in Senate chambers, shouts from hockey arenas when the anthem climbs, cresting like that ridge once did against a storm-dark sky. Beneath those twin pylons, carved figures of stone faith and stone mourning stand sentinel. And if you press a hand to the limestone, you might swear you feel a pulse, not of stone, but of 97,000 beating hearts, forever marching, forever climbing, forever Canadian. I hope you enjoyed the journey. Let's have a discussion in the comments. Subscribe to explore more history with us. See you next time.